Hey, welcome back, everybody, to Rough Cut Faith. It's nice to have you here.
It's good to be back.
Good for you. You've been on vacation for what, 10 days?
I have. I'm a real boy.
Yeah.
Oh, there you are, Scott.
Do you feel like you're
Yeah,
refreshed a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, we were just chatting a little bit, but yeah, it was surprising when you don't take a vacation, how long it takes you to relax when you finally get the chance to do that. So, but it's good to be home. I think that was but towards the end, I was like, okay, I miss our people, like this has been good. I like these experiences. I'd love to keep, doing things, but I think our whole family was ready to come home by that point.
Yeah.
So
that's a long time to spend away from home.
It was funny. Yeah, we had people checking on our fish and our cat, and we would occasionally hop on the video, and we would just notice that the cat was like, "What is up? Like, where is everybody at? Because this is not normal."
Just wander around the house.
I mean, she doesn't care if we're there when we're there, but when we're gone, it's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Hey, So, but other than that, I mean, it was really great to like pull in and get home, and that's nice to feel that way again. It took a long time when we would take vacation. You used to take vacations, you're like, I could live here. I could live here, And now it's like, I'm like, this is nice. It's a great place to visit. I'm ready to go home.
Yeah.
And we've watched some of the stuff from the church online, and we watched service. It was funny. I watched services on Sunday in my bathing suit. I was like, yep, this is good. I almost went and jumped in the hot tub and just to watch the service in a hot tub and be like, this sounds fun. But it was like we're ready to get back with our people, And so a lot going on. You take the deep breath and you're like, okay, here we go,
Yeah. Well, exciting news on our side. While you were gone,
yes,
our dogs got sprayed by skunks twice.
Oh no!
Twice, yes, in the backyard, in the middle of town.
Oh no!
Yeah. It was 10 days. It was actually Thursday of like a week and a half ago. They got sprayed.
Oh no!
And it was a mess. And our house just started to clear up.
And they just got hit again.
And last night they got it again. And I'm like, the skunk was actually one of the skunks died because I think when they were running around, a kayak fell on it. And we found it the next day under a kayak. And I'm like, oh my goodness. So yeah, so I also had to bury a skunk the next day. And I'm like, well, I guess that takes care of the skunk thing. But then last night they ran out in the yard and got sprayed again. So we're out there 11 o'clock. We're dousing them with the skunk diffusing stuff. Yeah.
Did you? Where did they get hit? The dogs?
Gambit got it right in the face the first time. He was gagging.
Yep. Yeah.
Then and Ginger, our other dog, she was always behind him, so she just got like a little bit. I think last night was not either. I'm getting more used to it, or they didn't get hit as bad.
Oh no, yeah.
Because I wasn't gagging this time.
Yeah. So when our dog got hit last year or the year before, and it was like. And
it was right in the mouth, though.
Jeremy's was right in the mouth. Okay. So all three of our dogs have been hit by skunks.
Within like the last few years.
Jeremy's, Jeremy's lab, bit the back end of the skunk and it sprayed in its mouth. And the best thing for Jeremy's was he had video footage of him going, no! And then the dog comes back frothing at the mouth. Yeah. Our dog got hit in the top of the head, and it was so face and the top of the head, but his mouth was closed, fortunately.
Oh, that's good.
But the smell doesn't go away, and every time they get wet, it shows back
all
up.
Over. And it's been raining, so every time they go out, it rains. They come back in, you're like, did you get hit again? Yeah. So
it's weeks of that joy.
While you were resting, and relaxing,
we were up late.
We were dealing with skunks.
This is free for anybody.
Yeah, this is great.
But there's a probiotic for the dogs. I would, if Gambit got hit in the mouth, I would suggest the probiotics because we had more issues on several days later with our dogs. Brutus's his intestinal stuff,
yeah.
and then we had like the sugar-free Haribo gummy bear experience
For dogs.
for dogs. Yeah, it was
yeah.
like fire hose of places. Yeah, so I would just encourage that. I probably
But
have some extra.
It didn't happen the first time, so we're
Oh, okay.
we're
That's
hoping
good.
that with less this time. It'll
Yeah.
be okay.
All right. Well, good
Yeah.
luck.
So anyway, for all of you watching or listening, that's the
Let's
Scott
talk
went on
about Jesus
vacation.
now.
I dealt with dogs and skunks,
Oh man.
among other things. All right, but today
Yeah.
we're going to tackle a topic that has come up a few times in conversation.
Yeah.
More recently, I think because of the election coming and
Sure.
this concept going more mainstream.
Or at least it's being addressed of like what's a Christian's role
Yeah.
in society and politics,
Yeah.
kind of a thing.
Right. So the concept of Christian nationalism
Sure.
has been around for years.
Yeah.
Some would argue ever since the founding. That's one of the things that that people are saying, and that's one of the ways that you can look at it. But the concept of Christian nationalism has been big on the political scene, in the media. It's kind of a mainstream concept now. I'd say ever since 2020, since the last election, that's when it really started to blow up and
Yeah.
become a mainstream concept. So we've had a couple of questions about it here at the church that we serve at.
Yeah.
And I've had some conversations with people asking more about it recently. So we thought
Yeah.
this would be a good time to maybe address it, to talk a
At
little
least
bit
have a little
about
more
it.
public conversation that might help folks that maybe aren't comfortable approaching right away to have
Yeah.
ask a question, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So conceptually, the idea of Christian nationalism is that Christianity should be the prevailing force within our national conversation. That politically, Christianity should be the mindset that then goes into all of the legal, all of the authority, all of the ways that our political system works and rules the country. The foundations of that should be Christianity. Christian nationalism doesn't say that other religions can't be practiced.
Yeah.
It does not stop them from doing that, but it does say that they are less than, that every other religion other than Christianity is a foreigner in the
Yeah.
country. And Christianity essentially is the prevailing religion of the United States. That's in a nutshell what it is.
That then has the say and authority to determine
Yeah.
the societal norms for the rest of society.
Right.
It's not just the predominant religion of the nation, it is the predominant religion and moral ethical standard
Yeah.
for all people,
Yeah.
whether they ascribe to it or not.
Right. Christianity is the moral framework through which everything
Yeah.
within the country is determined.
And so then the laws of the nation,
Mm-hmm.
or what is pursued to be passed, then must fall in alignment with a Christian theological framework.
yeah.
And whether you agree with it or not, then you would be beholden to that.
Yeah.
Right? Because
Yeah.
the hard part is, as we, like, when I was like, you texted me and said, well, I was thinking maybe we could have this conversation about Christian nationalism. You have any other ideas? Because we could talk about Christian nationalism and
Yeah.
discipleship. And I was like, oh, we'll just ease back in with a nice, easy, non-controversial
Yeah.
subject, right? But I think it's probably an important thing to talk about because in what tends to happen when you see these big umbrella words or phrases is that everybody gets to apply their own definition to it.
Right.
And that's where I think a lot of the confusion happens, because then you have people that would be like, well, but I'm a Christian and I want to be involved in politics.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
I think these things matter to me, and so I want my voice to be represented at a national level. That is different than the way that we're describing Christian nationalism.
Yeah.
Because Christian nationalism, as we have defined it and what at its roots is more of this is a political movement of force, as opposed to I want our voice to be heard and to be considered in the public forum.
Yeah.
We should have a seat at the table.
There's man, he's a professor. I think he's a political science professor.
Okay.
His name is Bradley Onishi, and he had ascribed to Christian nationalism at one point, and no longer believes that the framework is beneficial or helpful for the country. In an interview, I copied his description because I thought it was really helpful.
Okay, great.
From an academic perspective,
Sure.
for him to say what Christian nationalism is. So in an interview, he said, I think in very simple terms, Christian nationalism is the idea that Christian people should be privileged in the United States in some way, economically, socially, politically, and that influence and that privilege is a result of the country being founded by and for Christians.
Okay.
Christian nationalism is not the idea that others can't be here, that if you're Muslim or an atheist, that you have to leave. It's also not the idea that only Christians can be part of the government. However, for most Christian nationalists, there is a core belief that the story of the United States is one where it has been elected by God to play an exceptional role in human history. And as being chosen by God, it's the duty of Christian people to carry out his will on earth. So they take this approach that Christianity is the predominant view of the United States, and anywhere that it's not the predominant view, it needs to be forced into existence.
Sure.
So with that as kind of a foundational framework as to what Christian nationalism is, I think the first question that that comes to my mind is which version of Christianity gets to be in charge. In that structure, Christianity is the authority. Everyone else is allowed to kind of do their thing, but you have to, when it comes down to it, you have to ascribe to these things. A Christian nationalist would be pro-life. And so does that mean it's illegal then? Which is kind of the push, is illegal to get an abortion in whatever states. That's it. A Christian nationalist would be traditional view of marriage, which would it make it illegal then to have any other view of marriage? So on the front side, you kind of say, oh, as a Christian, I think I would say Christian nationalist might be a good thing because I'm a Christian, there's a moral framework for Christianity, a moral ethic, there needs to be a foundational ethic for everything. But then played out, then you're starting to look at how people live their lives on a day-to-day basis and go, should that authority, should that authoritarianism really play into the lives of these people? And then, of course, which version of Christianity gets to be the authority?
What is it? Yeah, and so I think the question you asked of which version of Christianity gets to be the standard, that's a huge one because, well, is that Roman Catholic Christianity? Is that Orthodox Christianity? Is that Baptist Christianity? Is that mainline denominational? Because the term, and usually what it tends to get associated with is, at least in what I'm observing, is that Christianity has become just an arm of a political movement as opposed to what I think Christ has called us to be. Right, and that's the challenge of, well, whose version of Christianity, like you said, but it's more than just that. Whose version of Christianity, but then what is the purpose of it? And I'm reminded of Jesus in front of Pilate, when Pilate, are you a king? And he's like, yeah, but my kingdom is not of this world. If it was, I could have the armies of heaven here. Right. And so then, okay, so if Jesus in that moment is pointing to something beyond a political or an empirical nature and is saying that what I represent, where I'm king, it's bigger than Rome. And I think the challenge is, how do Christians then respond if Christian nationalism is saying this is the way it's supposed to be, and we will, by our authority and force, put this forward and make this happen and subjugate people into this perspective? I refer to it as like in a personal level of weekend at Bernieing people, where
Yeah.
you take
Yeah.
the picture of what Scripture says of spiritual life, those who are spiritually alive, those who are spiritually dead, and you say, okay, if someone doesn't hold to Christ as King, if someone doesn't hold to Christ as Savior,
Yeah.
and you say, but you must live according to this, then are you inoculating them to the good news of Jesus? Are you creating a situation where you have a culture of Christian value
Yes.
that is devoid
Yes.
of the transformation of the Spirit, and then you have people that go, well, Christianity doesn't work.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because societally, we have looked at education or knowledge as, oh, this is the key.
Yeah.
This will make everything better. We've looked at, any number of like, oh, here is the
There's a
here's
panacea
the
out there.
social
There's
here's the
something- yeah.
social like key that's going to fix it all.
Yeah.
And socially or ethically to go, and this is the hard part, right? As a Christian, I ascribe to a lot of those values.
Right. Right.
But at a political level, like, I think it's important that we not only have some, like, where's the line? Where's the line for the moral standards, right? And then whose
Yeah.
interpretation of those moral standards do
Yep.
we use? And so, as a Christian, I think it's more important that Christians understand their own convictions and actually begin to live those out in the
Yeah.
places where they touch, the places where they go, the places where they work, and then there will be some who will engage at a political level, either in their
Yep.
county
Yep.
or their city or their state or their
Or
federal
on the
government,
national level. Yeah.
right? And they represent that perspective, that voice, but they're also representing people that don't hold to that too.
Yes.
Right? And
Yes.
that's where it gets.
That's where it's tricky. That's why I think I shouldn't have said tricky. That's not the word I wanted to use.
It's tricky.
It's tricky.
What? Sorry. Yeah.
That's where your brain just like fires on so many levels.
Sorry.
Well, that's where I think it's hard when you look at a Christian moral ethic
Yeah.
as a national representative. So you have a view on particular things, but as a representative of a greater multi-ethnic, multi-view constituency, how do you represent them well? Because that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
You're supposed to represent your constituency on a national, on a federal level.
Yeah.
But if you're only representing a quarter of your constituency because they all agree with you,
Yeah.
or you agree with all of them, are you really fulfilling the role that you are
Yeah.
supposed to within a governmental system? And I don't think you can.
Yeah.
I think it's disingenuous to
Yeah.
say, there's 500,000 people in my district,
Yeah.
and 100,000 of them agree with me.
Yeah.
And so I have a mandate then to go to Washington and pass laws that 100,000 of the people in my district like and 400,000 despise. But I'm going to pass it because they agree with me and I agree with them.
Yeah.
And the complexity of it is, well, I have a moral obligation
Sure.
to live according to my standards. And then is your moral obligation, though, to force everyone else to live according to your standards?
Yeah, and that's I think that we think that the debate is new for us.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like you look at, like even if you go back to Reformation and you look at the exchange of the papacy in Rome for the German princes, basically the church just shifted its power away from Rome to a German nationalistic type of power. Like, okay, now we're going to have these guys be in charge. And then you look at the Church of England. Well, I don't like those guys, so the church will become political again, and it will happen. And then you've got like the Quakers and the Anabaptist tradition, many of which say we shouldn't be involved in politics at all.
Yeah.
Right? And so there's got to be I'm not quite there.
Right.
Because I do think we compared to many nations around the world, have a unique opportunity to be engaged in the political voice of our communities.
Yeah.
It's not as unique as it used to be, but it is a unique opportunity that we have as
Yeah.
Christians that live in the United States of
Well,
America.
let's go down that trail a little bit,
Sure.
because the United States was unique back when it was founded.
Sure.
If we look from a historical perspective, go all the way back to Sumeria,
Yeah.
Sumeria, Egypt.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about Israel. We talk a lot about the nations that surrounded Israel, that Middle East. We see this in the further eastern nations. We see it in almost every historical nation that we've ever come across. The religious aspect of that nation was intimately tied to the ruling
Yes,
class.
absolutely.
So throughout all of history, we've always seen that kings are demigods or chosen by God
Yep.
or something along those lines, and all the way up to like modern times, you could say that King George right now in England is still the head of the Anglican Church.
Yep.
And that line of kings, that line of royalty,
Yeah.
it is a line of royalty because the belief was that God chose that people, those people in that family to be the leaders
Yeah.
of this church and this country. So all throughout history,
Yeah.
thousands and thousands of years, we have seen a national religion.
Sure.
When the United States was formed, they purposefully said, we will have no national religion. And there were colonies that were against that. When certain colonies were like, nope, this is the colony of the New England, one of these New
Yeah.
England colonies. Everyone has to practice this religion.
Yeah, we're
This
Puritans
is Puritan.
here.
This
Yep.
is a Puritan colony.
Yeah, we're
If you
Presbyterian
yeah,
here.
Yep, you
We're-
don't
yep.
agree. Yeah.
Yep.
So there was, even within that, there was like this is the safe place for us to practice our religion, and nobody can disagree with that.
Yeah.
And there's safety in that
Yeah.
because you can say, we all practice the same
Yeah.
thing, and if you disagree,
And then they
we
drown
kick you
people.
out.
They
exactly.
drown people that they disagree
Yeah,
with.
yeah, you disagree with us, you're out of here.
Yeah.
So because of all of that, because of the persecution that was experienced
Yeah.
throughout all of Europe, because of persecution that was experienced in the early colonies
Yeah.
here in the United States, when this Continental Congress came together,
Yeah.
they very early on said there should not be a national religion because of this, because
Yeah.
this is a pluralistic
Yeah.
society.
Now to counterpoint that, because I can think of people that are like hearing you describe this
Yeah,
and going, but they still had Christian values, Christian moral ethic, Judeo, like. Yes.
Sure, yes.
There was a social framework that was there that was rooted in the Judeo-Christian
Yeah.
value structure. But like even you
But
think
it's-
of Jefferson.
But it wouldn't be the value structure that we
No.
would say. It would be based on Anglicanism.
Yep.
It'd be based on Puritanism.
Yep.
It'd be based on
Presbyterian somewhat.
a
right?
lot of different structures
Yeah.
that were carried over.
But even Jefferson, like, disregarded the miraculous aspects of
Yeah.
who Jesus was.
Yeah.
You know, the guys that framed so many parts of.
Many of them were deists.
Yep. Yeah.
It was like this recognition that there is a power out there.
Yeah.
But
there is a God.
Yeah.
You know, but he's kind of letting us.
Yeah.
We're on our own.
yeah.
And that I think that's where history is more complicated than
Yeah.
we would like
Yeah.
to make it. And I think a simplistic, like I like to say, you know, if you have to have a complicated solution, then it's not going to work, right? But an oversimplistic solution that disregards the actual
Yep.
problem
Yep.
or the full picture isn't helpful either.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, as Christians, there is room for political disagreement, because there is room for degrees in which we are politically involved.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
a lot of that, I think, comes to the next conversation that we'll have, you know, in next week's episode of, well, what does it then mean to be a disciple of Jesus? What does
Yeah.
it mean to help make disciples? Because politic should flow out of our discipleship to Christ.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a really important distinction. When after you texted me this, hey, maybe these are things we could talk about, I thought about that phrase. What is it? The history is written by the victor. And so then I thought, okay, well, who are the people that lost, to someone else that then that victor wrote the story, and that's what we think of. So like Rome wrote their story about conquering the Jewish people.
Yep.
What about like ask someone from Ireland what they think about the history that the English would say about them, right?
Ask a
Native American
Yeah.
what, or even an indigenous people group, right?
Yep, yep.
I think that's the way we ask
Refer,
somebody
yeah.
like that now.
Yeah, yeah.
What was your side of the story? Because we don't necessarily get that. In fact, I know we had the conversation on the Avids. There's one of those songs that they're like, hey, like they're addressing that, like that love for country, but the complicated past.
Yep, yep.
Where there's sometimes we just skip chapters of our national story, or we
Yeah.
just rip the pages out altogether.
Which I think, I don't want to interrupt
No,
your
that's fine.
flow of thought, but it brings up an important point.
Yeah.
At what point were we a Christian nation then?
Yeah.
And how do we measure that?
Sure. Right.
So you said there was a moral framework,
Yeah.
which is true, and we
Yeah.
have this moral framework that's written into the DNA of our country. But it was selective moral frameworks.
Yep. Exactly.
So were we a Christian nation when we were committing genocide
yeah.
in westward expansion? Was that part of our Christian
Yeah.
moral framework?
Yeah.
Were we a Christian nation when we were enslaving people groups from all over the world to make us wealthier?
Yeah.
Was that part of the moral framework, the Christian moral framework? The treatment of women throughout our history,
Yeah.
throughout world history,
Yeah.
but like in the United States,
Yeah.
it didn't really change.
Yeah.
So there were, at any time, the ruling parties oppressed the lower, the weaker
Yeah.
people. You could even look at the Industrial Revolution and how
Yeah.
the corporate magnates at that time, the America's first millionaires, were terrible to
Yeah.
their workers.
Yeah.
It was death, like certain death
Yeah.
in some instances. Even in our own region, we had
Yeah.
in Scranton, we had the coal mines, where if a father died in the mines, the family had 2 days to give one of their sons to the mining crew, and if they didn't, they were kicked out because they lived in
Like a company house.
in a company home. Yeah. So, is that a moral framework in
Yeah.
a Christian nation? Like, so I feel like
Yeah.
we can look at our history and
Yep.
claim this moral framework,
Yeah.
and yet the way it played out was not necessarily
Yeah.
what we would say
Yeah.
was Christian.
And so that's when we have to be really careful
Yeah.
that we're sitting back and going, well, moving forward at a political level, the church,
Yeah. whichever church it happens
whichever
to be.
church it happens to be, Christians,
Mm-hmm.
whichever stream of Christian, like, well, don't disregard the extremes.
Yeah.
Well, no.
The
because
extremes are
that's-
part of history.
It is, right?
Yeah.
And so that's where I think what the teachings of Jesus call us to is something higher than that.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
something maybe even much more tangible and yet much more difficult to put a finger on. And that's where, that's where I think people have to come to a point of conviction for themselves and allow that point of conviction to be shaped by a growing faith and relationship with God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not something that's handed to them and says, this is what you have to believe.
Well, I think that goes back to your point that you made a few minutes ago that I thought was really important. When you create a society that takes away the need for discernment,
Yeah.
takes away the need for working out your faith,
Yeah.
takes away the need for understanding where this framework comes from, where this moral and ethical principles come from. It just tells you what to do
Yeah.
without giving any type of heart change
Yeah.
to it. Then we still haven't created a Christian society.
Sure.
We have a society where Christians are more comfortable.
Yes. Yep.
but we haven't created a Christian nation.
I'll give you a great example of that. Maybe it's not a great example, but it's the story my brain went to.
Yeah,
right?
Go for it.
When I first moved here to this area, I didn't have a job or anything like that. I was like, hey, I'm gonna go find a job, right? So I drove around. I got hired at a local warehouse picking parts, and so I worked second shift in a warehouse alongside of 40 plus other people. And in that environment, I had just come out of Bible college, and so there were specific things that I was most comfortable with, right? And I remember, I was still relatively young and I'd worked, outside of the church before I went to school, so I'd heard plenty of things, right? But I had spent the last 4 years working inside of a Bible college bubble, and then I'm in this warehouse, and the language was I was shocked, and I remember being like, I thought my responsibility was to say, hey, would you mind not talking like that around me?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that offends me. Would you mind not doing that, please?
Yeah.
And I thought I was being polite. Looking back now, some would go like, get off your horse. Like really?
Yeah. Who
And
do you
they
think
may
you
not
are?
use the language around me, but there was a degree of animosity that I picked up because I'd asked.
Yeah.
Right? And then there were others that were just like, well, I won't say what they would say. Right? We'd have to change the rating on this,
Suffice to say, it was not.
It was not the
Acquiescing to
reaction.
your request.
No, yeah. And I remember it was months later that there was one other person that was there that had grown up in church, wasn't crazy active, but that person, she had the respect of the crews that were there. And I remember she came up, I was there with her talking one day, and she said, I told the guys to just lay off of you because and she was just like, you're just trying to live out what you believe. And I just told them to just lay off. And she's like, I don't know if they will or not, but I asked them to, and I was like, well, why did you have to ask them? Because I already asked weeks ago,
Yep.
and I hadn't seen any transition. But it was that weird sense of, that's when the picture of Weekend at Bernie's, that illustration developed out of that, because here I was, I lost a voice in most of those people's lives.
Yeah.
Because I asked them to choose specific words around me. And I can tell you there was no relational connection that I had in that place with anyone.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, the next time that I work in an environment like this, I will use a different approach. And so I ended up in special education, working at a school. And it's funny because when the kids aren't around, the conversation wasn't drastically different than what I heard in the warehouse, But I had made a decision of, I'm going to care about these people, and I will still speak for truth and my convictions there, but the way I'm going to do it's going to be different. And so that experience, I had more opportunities to share my perspective, to share, but because I had established relationships with them, I remember there was one day in particular we were having conversations in and around marriage equality and some of that stuff, and I just shared a little bit of my story and some of my family history in and around that issue and why I hold to a perspective that was different. And in that conversation in the lunchroom, I still remember being like, okay, am I going to lose relationships over this or not? And the interaction was completely different.
Yeah.
The interaction was I remember somebody going, well, I don't have family, that's there. I just disagree with you. And I'm like, that's okay. But just, this is where I'm at.
Yeah.
And when I left that place, I had people that would still reach out and be like, "Hey, I'm thinking about getting married. What,
Yeah.
Hey, we're going through this. Hey, we're doing this. Would you like to come back?" Like there was a relational connection
Yep,
that
yep.
lasted and endured because my convictions, which I spoke clearly about, much more clearly than I ever had at any point in my life, spoke much more clearly with people that I knew disagreed with me.
Yeah.
But I maintained the relationship and I maintained the opportunity to be a voice in their life and to care about them and to represent Jesus
Yep.
in those relationships. I have no connections with anybody from the warehouse.
Yeah.
None.
Yeah. And I think like that is such a perfect example of authoritarian Christianity versus persuasive Christianity. When you have authoritarian Christianity,
Sure.
it forces one interpretation upon the masses.
Yeah.
And that's like just a perfect microcosm
Yeah.
of this, that you came in and said, hey, I'm uncomfortable with this language. God's on my side.
Yeah.
Please stop doing that.
Yeah.
There was no persuasion. There was no relational connection.
Yep.
There was no showing that you loved
Yeah.
them. It didn't come from a place of care for them.
Yeah.
It was a place of comfort for you.
Yes.
And I don't mean to be too harsh
No,
on
that's
that.
fine. That's fine. It's true.
But when you thought about persuasion, it came from a place of relationship.
Yep.
It comes from a place of care.
Yep.
It comes from loving them
Yeah.
and them recognizing that there's a relational connection there. And you're not telling them to do something different or to believe something different
Yeah.
or to think differently even. You're able to say, here's what my convictions are,
Yeah.
and here's why.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if I'm uncomfortable with yours,
Yeah.
I'm still going to hold these same convictions.
Yeah.
And I think,
I'm going to try to do what's best for you,
yes,
even in the midst of it.
right. And what's best is not always making sure they change their mind to match yours.
Yeah.
What's best is a relational connection where you can continue to live out your
Yeah.
faith
Yeah.
in a way that might eventually persuade them.
Yeah.
And like you said, years later, you still had relationships
Yeah.
with people. They would still seek
Yeah,
you out.
I still do.
Yeah.
And, I mean, we're a dozen
15
plus,
years
15,
later,
17
yeah.
years later. It's not odd for me to go and visit. Like
Yeah.
when somebody has a family member that's passed, I go to those memorials.
Yep, yep.
I show up at those things because those people matter to me.
Yeah.
And I think that's, now, the other side of that is you sit back and if you take that to a political spectrum and you
Right.
go, if I can't put what I believe in place, will people be generous towards me
Yeah.
the way that I'm trying to be generous towards
Yeah.
them?
Yeah.
Because there is an aspect of human nature that says we will establish what is right and what is normal.
Yeah.
And you either toe the line or get in line or not.
Yeah.
Right? History tells us that.
Right, right.
And so in our generosity, are we establishing a pattern where we're going to be the ones taken advantage of?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's where I think discipleship matters.
I think it does, and I think that would be. I think we can mix this conversation, but that's a good place for us to
Yeah.
to transition into why is discipleship better than American nationalism,
Yeah.
Christian nationalism.
Yeah. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Can't wait to hear what you have to say on that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's let's pull this one to a close.
Yeah.
And thanks for being with us. Thanks
Absolutely.
for listening to the ramblings of our thoughts as we come back from vacation. and
Try to sort this all out.
Yeah. But I think it's an important concept and discussion to have, and I'm looking forward to where we go with it next week and how
Yeah.
that plays out. But thanks again for joining us here, and like always, if you have any questions, go to discoverthegrove.com and fill out a contact form there. You can ask questions there, or you can leave questions in the comments under the YouTube video. That would be fine as well. We'll see them, and questions or comments or things that you think that we should address.
Yeah. Clarifications that
Yep.
you need.
Yep. Anything like that, we're happy to help clarify in any way.
Yeah.
But thanks again for being with us. It's been great.
Thanks, guys.